Hello all, it's Shifty here, and today I'm going to show you how to make a respawn ship mod which will replace these vanilla respawn pods with ships of your choice. I'm going to be using these ships right here. It's completely up to you though. You can use any ships you want. You can use one ship, two ships, you can use 5 different ships, 10, however you want. It's pretty cool, and you can really give your next playthrough a interesting start. Oftentimes I find that the most memorable parts of my playthroughs are the way I start the playthrough. So I think switching up what you're using for respawn pods is a valuable thing, especially in a server setting. It's a great way to make your server very unique and have your players have a very memorable starting experience. Stand out from the very beginning. Definitely something cool to do. So before we get into the mod making part of it, I think it would be good to go over what you need to do with the ships you want to use, because they do need certain settings set up in a specific way before you will export them into an SBC file and then be using that for the mod. Alright, and for an example for that, I'm going to use what will be my planetary pod. So this vehicle right here, use that as an example for this part. You're going to have to do this for every single vehicle, but just repeat the process I'm doing for this. It's the same for all of them regardless of where you're going to be spawning. So you're going to get your vehicle out, and you're going to want to go in to your vehicle, make sure you can see all the blocks, select them all, so I just use Control A, and you want to set the ownership to nobody. The next thing I think you should look at for your ship is definitely the inventory. You should make sure that you're giving your players something to start out with, and if your ship has a parachute hatch, make sure it has a parachute in it, and it is also set to auto deploy. So you want it to auto deploy and set it to a reasonable height. You're also going to want to jump in and out of your seat. So you'll automatically spawn in whatever seat there is on the vehicle, but when you get out of the seat, the blueprint remembers where you last got in the seat. So if I were to get in this seat, flipped upside down and from up here, when I get out of the ship in the game, when I spawn in, I will get out of the ship up here and flipped upside down, and then I'll like fall weird and whatnot. So I definitely think it's good to go ahead, line yourself up where you want to be lined up, and then just hop in and out of the seat. It's a little bit awkward for this one because I actually have to remove a panel to do that, but now I will get out standing in front of the vehicle. I did this before during testing, and I got in through this little nook here, and I was upside down like this, and every time I spawned with this vehicle and I got out of the seat, I got out and I was upside down and I was in gravity, and I'd flip over and I'd be standing on the vehicle, and it was just a little bit awkward. It really doesn't affect the gameplay, but the immersion's just like a little bit weird. So jump in and out of the seat in a position where you're happy with your player getting in and out of the seat. Someplace that makes sense. I think those places are fine for all these, so that's what I'm going to use. Once you have those settings figured out, you will just copy this. So I use Control C. If you have your admin tools out, you can get to that by Alt F10. Make sure you have creative tools, and then you can copy. And that will put this on your clipboard. You don't actually need to paste it, it just has to be on your clipboard. And then you will click F11. F11 will let you export what is on your clipboard to a file. So I'm going to export this clipboard to a file. It's just going to go in a weird place. Just make note of this. It drops it in your prefabs, and you're going to have to go get that. So that is that one taken care of. You go through and you'll do that with all of these different ships, and then you will have the prefabs in SBC files for all your different ships. That's all the settings you need and all the files you're going to need, except for a couple screenshots. So we're going to take those right now. You're going to want a screenshot that you can use for your thumbnail image on the workshop. Now you can make this as fancy as you want. I'm going to do something really simple, and that's just take a picture that has all my vehicles on it, and I'm just going to use that for now. And then I'm going to want an image of each of the vehicles individually, and it's going to be a really simple image. This one doesn't have to be fancy at all. In fact, the simpler the better. It just has to be very clear what the vehicle is. These images are going to be used in-game, and they'll be what you see when you actually are hovering which ship to respawn with. They'll show up. We're going to remove the backgrounds from these images and clean them up a little bit, but they're also going to be very simple. It just has to be very clear what you're spawning in with. now that we have all of the images and files that we're going to need to actually start building the mod, we're going to do that. I'm back out on my desktop, and what you need to do is you need to go to your Space Engineers folder. This is going to be a different place. A lot of these files are going to be in different places depending on your system and your setup and whether or not you told it to put things in weird places. Generally speaking, you should be able to find these if you just Google where they go by default. But I'm not going to go over in very huge detail where you're going to find everything. I will leave open my windows so that you can see the path on my computer, and that should give you a good idea of where you need to go on yours. Alright, so you need to find your Space Engineers folder. That one should be in App Data Roaming Space Engineers, and then inside of that folder you are going to have a mods folder. This is where all of your local mods are stored. I only have a couple. You might have a bunch if you've made mods before. You'll probably have none if you haven't made any mods before. So here's your mods. I'm going to create a new folder for this new mod, and I'm just going to call it HGG Respawn Pods. Alright, that's going to be the name of my mod. We'll open this up, and we're going to have to make a couple more folders right away inside this. The first folder we're going to make is called Data, and these names have to be exactly right, so do pay attention to these. They can't have extra spaces or anything. I found that out the hard way. So this one has to be Data. The next folder is going to be Prefabs. And then inside of Prefabs, that is where we are going to drop those SBC files that we just created. And where you're going to find those is if you back out to your Space Engineers folder. In Export, that is default where they should be getting dropped. Okay? So I'm going to just copy these, and then we will go back into our mods, go into our current mod that we're working on, Data, Prefabs, and we'll drop those in here. One more thing you want to do with these files is you're going to want to remove all the spaces and special characters from these file names. So I'll go ahead and do that. And once that's done, you're going to want to open up each of these, and you're going to change basically just one line inside of it. Don't get overwhelmed by the code. You can open these up in just a regular text editor, but I have Notepad++. I'm going to use that. It is a free program. I'll have a link to the download in the description if you do want to check it out. It basically just makes things a little bit easier to read when you're editing code. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up the file. You're going to find the line. It's really close to the beginning. It says subtype, and then it has some sort of name inside of it. And you're going to make sure that this name here also has no spaces or weird characters. You're going to be referencing this in another bit of code, and it's just best to have it set up this way. So go through and change that, and then go and change it for all of the other things. You can see here I actually need to remove that. And here's my space pod. It's already set up. It's going to have whatever the name of your ship initially was. Just make sure it has no spaces, no special characters, and make sure that you then save all these files. Oh, there is actually one more thing you want to change in these files, and that is really close to the bottom. You will find a display name, and this is going to be something weird. It's again going to be like what you named your vehicle. Change this to something that's just easy to read. I used the same thing as I had up top, and I just put spaces in it. I think that's a good way to go, and go ahead and do that on all of the other ones as well. Once that's done, we are going to go back out to our data, and we need one more file in here. And we've basically got everything covered except for our images then. So where you're going to have to find this file is in the other Space Engineers location on your hard drive. This one is generally in your local disk program files, and then you'll have to go Steam, Steam Apps, Common, etc. So you need to go to this location in the data folder, and you need to find the file called respawnships.sbc. Copy this, do not cut it. Copy it, and you just paste it into the data folder here. Once you have that file, you go ahead and open it up the same way you did it before, because we need to edit some stuff in here. Inside of this, there's a few things we want to do. I'm going to add some spaces just to make it a little bit clear. These blocks here that I'm spacing out, these are your default respawn ships. This is all the code for getting those to work, kind of. And this is what we want to disable. We want to disable all these ships, but I do want to keep this code around because I'm going to use it as a template for the new ships we put in. So in order to disable these, we are going to go in after ship and type enabled equals false. and false has to be in these little quotation marks. So once you have that, I'm just going to copy and I'm going to paste that over the rest of these. That way I don't have to type it a million times. So all of these are now disabled, and I can take this information and I can copy it, and we can then set up our new respawn ships. So that's what I'm going to do right away. I'm going to copy this first one. This one is for the respawn planet pod. So that's the first one of mine I'm going to set up. And we'll just paste it in all spaced out nicely, just like everything else was. And I'll leave this open for now. There's a few things in here we need to change. First of all, we need to change the subtype ID so that it matches our planet pod subtype ID. And I still have this one open. This is the SBC file for the planet pod, but that is this number or this identifier right here, subtype. That has to match the subtype ID right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that right there. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that there as well. For the prefabs, so you want to replace it in prefabs, you want to replace it in the sub ID. And this right here, this icon, this is where that image, those individual images of the ships, this is that file, the file that's going to show up in game. And I'm going to name that file basically the same as everything else. So I'm going to take my planet pod and I'm going to go HGG planet pod, and this is going to be a PNG image. We still need to build up this folder location in our mods folder and then put this file in there. So we'll get to that later, but for now I'm just going to basically replace everywhere in this new chunk where it used to say respawn planet pod. I'm changing it to my new planet pod. And we will get rid of this enabled equals false. And that right there is basically 100% replacement. I turned off all of the default pods, and now anywhere I would have seen a default planet pod, I will now see a custom planet pod, my planet pod. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other two types of pods. I'm going to copy and paste this one here, which is the moon pod. Just take that whole chunk of code, copy it, minimize these chunks again, just to keep things straight, and right below my planet pod, we will put a new moon pod. We're going to remove this right away again, so it's not disabled. And everywhere it says a respawn moon pod, I'm going to go ahead and change it to my HGG moon pod. Go back to here. Now this is the subtype ID. I need to replace that. This is a completely different file, but I'm going to give it the same overall name. It's going to be a PNG file, and it's going to be in a different location, so it really doesn't matter that these have the same name in front of the file type extension. And also it's kind of the same situation for this here. So I'm just going to name all these different things the same thing, and it just makes my life a lot easier. And once that's done, we're going to go take this and we're going to copy the space pod, and we're going to just make a new block for the space pod. It's all the same once again. And here's the space pod. That's the name we're going to use for that. So we'll copy that and we will replace it in those three locations again. Now, these blocks of code are slightly different. All of the respawn planet pods have a little bit different parameters for how they're going to land on the planet. You can read through all these different things and you can kind of tweak them as you see fit. I might change a few things. I don't like them spinning a whole lot when I come in, so I'm going to just reduce this number from 0.5 to 0.1. I'm going to reduce the cooldown time on all of these to 240 seconds. I don't need people to wait extremely long before they can use a respawn pod again, so I'm going to change the cooldown time for all of those. Also, I kind of forgot about this until later, so some things might look a little bit different here, but something you might want to change right now is all the display names for these different vehicles. Change them to something that makes sense. I just basically made it the same as this with spaces, so that's easier to read, and the same for the moon pod and the same for the space pod. And that's pretty much all the changes I need to do in this file. If I just want to straight up do a one-for-one replacement of the old spawn pods with the new spawn pods. Now I want things to be a little bit different for my purposes. I want to have a little more control over exactly what planets or moons people spawn with certain pods. So I'm actually going to remove this line here for the planet pod. It says use for planets with atmosphere. Unfortunately, this actually includes Titan and Europa. Those moons are included in that. And I don't want that. I want it just to be planets. So I'm going to remove that line, and instead I'm going to paste in something different. What I'm going to put in here instead is this chunk of code. This is going to allow me to enable this specific pod for individual planets and moons. And this just enables it for all of them. I'm going to copy and paste this whole chunk into my other areas here. So I'm just going to put it right above the deploy altitude for all of them. Space actually doesn't have it, so I'm actually not going to paste that into the space one. But for the moon one, I actually need to remove this line here that says use for planets without atmosphere, because that's how it default distinguishes between planets and moons. And I don't exactly like that, because default it will include Europa and Titan in the planets category, not the moons category. And I want them to be considered moons. So I'm going to delete those from my planet pod, and I'm going to delete the planets from my moon pod. So I'm enabling planet types of the moons, because they're all planet types in Space Engineers, and I'm enabling the planets for the planet pod. And that is just a little bit more specific the way I want it to actually work out and play out in my game. You don't need to do that little step. I just thought it was nice. And if you do have a different pod that you want to use and assign to every different planet or moon, this is the way I would go about doing it. I would assign each pod to a different place and to only that place, and then when you have the options in game, you only get those options that you want. And I think that's really cool, and I'll probably end up doing that actually for our server. I think that'd be kind of neat. But anyway, that's it for editing in this file. We're just going to save it and minimize this. Bring us back to the mods, just the default folder for our mod. And this file was out here, but we're going to take the image that we're going to use for the thumbnail of our mod, and we just drop it into the mod folder in the same place where the data is. You don't want to put it in the data folder, but right here. And you're going to rename this to thumb.either JPEG or PNG. Both those file types work. There's probably other ones, but those are the most common. And I'm actually going to edit this file. Basically, all we have left to do is edit some files and add a couple folders. We're almost done. So we're going to edit this file. I'm going to do that in GIMP. And basically, I'm just making this file really small. So right now, it's 1600 by 900, and that does take up a decent amount of space. What we're going to do is we're going to make all these images really small and clean them up a little bit. And that way, it will make our file size for the entire mod very small. And of course, that's really good for loading into servers and everything else like that. It's just a very consistent thing to do. We can add high definition pictures to our Steam Workshop page or our mod.io workshop page, and then people can see in detail what things look like, but thumbnails are not super important, so we want to make those small. All right, boom, we have this image sorted out. It's smaller. I went ahead and added a little bit of text to it so we can kind of see what's going on. Now, remember when we were in our respawn ships thing, and I was talking about how we need to make this folder path so that we can then put our PNG images for in-game images? Well, we're going to go ahead and do that. So we need to make a folder called textures, GUI, icons, respawn ships, all nested together. I'm going to go ahead and do that. That needs to be in the main mod folder, so right next to data. We're then going to add this folder called textures. Inside textures, we have GUI, then icons, and then respawn ships. Remember not to put a space in this. That tripped me up the first time I was working on this mod. So it has to look exactly how it looks in this list right here, because you are making that path. All right, so now we have this path sorted out. We are going to take our images for our ships, and that is where we need to put those. So I'm just going to drop these files in here. We do need to edit these and rename these. So we need to rename these so that they correspond to these names right here: HGG Moon Pod, HGG Space Pod, and etc. And they all have to be PNG files. We're also going to go ahead and shrink them down and remove the backgrounds so that when you're in game it looks nice and clean. And with a little bit of editing magic, we are done with that. This is what they'll look like in game. We'll just have the nice background right behind them. and they're all cut out, so those look great. I'm going to go ahead and just delete these files because we no longer need them in our folder. Didn't really need them there in the first place. I just put them there to know where I was going to put these new files when I was editing in my program. And we're basically done. Now let's go in game and let's test this out. Alright, we are on the start menu in game. The way we're going to test this is we're going to just create a new game. We'll go to custom games and choose the star system so that we can try out all the different pods. We're not going to rename it, we'll leave it on survival, offline mode for testing. We do need to go into mods and we need to activate our current mod, the one we want. So you just move it over with that little arrow there, and then we hit OK and start. Alright, here we are in game. You can hover over and we can see our different pods. We got this beautiful image with the background cut out. That's like extra steps. You definitely don't have to do that. You can just put whatever image in here. You don't have to make it smaller. You don't have to cut the background out. It's just if you want it to look really nice and polished, I recommend doing it. Everything always looks better when you put the time and effort in, so do it if you want. If you just want the function and none of the form, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, let's respawn in on the Earth pod just to try it. Do a test on that. Alright, here we are dropping in on Earth. Parachute should open shortly here without us doing anything. Whoa! There we go. Alright, parachute's open. If you have economy enabled on your single player or your multiplayer server or whatever you're loading into, you will get this GPS thing automatically. You don't have to worry about doing anything with that. With the mod, that will happen on its own, which is super nice. And you can see that all the blocks are owned by us, and that all gets assigned automatically as well. And I get out of the ship nice and comfy in the front without having to flip upside down or anything weird, because I did jump in and out of my seat before I saved it and did this whole thing. Alright, so that works good. Let's delete that, and I'm going to go respawn on a moon. We can test out our moon pod here. Let's do that on Triton. Titan's a moon. Let's respawn on Titan and get our moon pod. Whoa, that felt high for a second. I couldn't tell how far I was away from the vehicle, but as you can see, we spawned here 8 meters above the ground on Titan. And yeah, now we can drive around this moon in our moon pod, which is super cool. Everything worked out nice. Once again, we have our data pad and all of our inventory stuff. Let's try out the space pod. Just respawn here quick. And the last thing to try is the space pod. It spawns us in our little pod and pointed at an asteroid like you would in any other setting, which is perfect. So that is going to be it for testing. The last thing I want to show you is how to publish this thing up to the workshop so that you can use it on a server, or anyone who wants can use it on a server. And for that, we need to go back to the main menu. We're going to go to load game. We'll go to the one we just had. We'll go to edit settings. We will go to the mods. And you're going to just click on the mod here and hit publish. Do you want to upload to your workshop? Yeah. It's a respawn ship, and I'm going to do it on Steam just for the sake of it. You can upload it wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. And I'll have it pop open my thing. You can see this is just the default image. We can then go and add images and videos, and this will just be up in this corner then, and they'll have nice HD images all over the place for people to look at, make a nice description describing exactly what it is this does, and yeah, you're pretty much set. You do have to change the visibility to public for other people to use it. You can leave it unlisted, and you can still use it on server. A lot of times if you're changing somebody else's mod or something, you'll just, or duplicating their mod, you leave it unlisted. That's kind of the polite thing to do. Also, yeah, I'm going to set this to hidden for now because I'm going to write a nice description, and then when I have a nice description and a whole bunch of good images, then I will go ahead and I will set it to public. Well, I believe that is going to be it for this video. If you want some cool ideas of what types of things you can do with drop pods or just some different looks at things, we had a recent competition on the Discord server to build drop pods of our own, and I did a walkthrough of all those in a video that I put up on my community channel. Link for that will be in the description. If you enjoyed this video and it was helpful, definitely consider taking the 1 second it takes to hit that like and subscribe. It's always weird asking for it, but it really does help the channel. Anyway, I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you next time.